We are coming on the air as House members are heading to the floor, getting ready to start debate in just about 30 minutes on whether to hold Mark Meadows in contempt of Congress, with that full vote expected soon and those new details, on just who was sliding into the former chief of staff's texts, saying the insurrection made him and them look bad.
It is really bad up here on the Hill. The president needs to stop this ASAP. Fix this now.
We're live on the Hill with our team in just a minute. We're also live on the ground in Kentucky, where the governor just finished a tour of one of the hardest hit areas in that tornado outbreak. We're going to take you there. Plus, what abortion providers in Texas are asking the Supreme Court to do today, the request they're making this afternoon to the justices, and why the state is trying to stop them. I'm Hallie Jackson in Washington with you this afternoon with a ton to get to, and all of it either just happening or about to happen. So let's lay it out here. First, there's that contempt vote against former Trump Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. And you can bet you'll see some fiery floor speeches on that when the House starts debate right around 3:30 before the vote. With January 6th Committee Vice Chair Liz Cheney, you heard it just a minute ago at the top of the show there, revealing more text messages from Republican lawmakers basically begging Meadows to have the president do something to stop the violence. The committee planning more depositions with the guy you see right there, former Trump advisor Stephen Miller, among those who are supposed to show up today, TBD on whether that happened. And we also just saw the D.C. Attorney General announce a lawsuit against the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers. With that backdrop, and a warning that this show, we're going to be dipping into live coverage, I think, quite a bit here. I want to bring in our NBC News team. Garrett Haake is our senior Capitol Hill correspondent. Pete Williams, our justice correspondent. We're also joined by Nicholas Wu, congressional reporter for Politico. And Garrett, let me start with this contempt vote against Mark Meadows that's about to take place in the House. And to set that scene, we've got to talk about those extraordinary texts, right, that the January 6th committee says Mark Meadows got, including from Donald Trump Jr. on the afternoon of the riot. Quote, "We need an Oval Office address. He has to lead now. It's gone too far," he writes, and gotten out of hand. And he also says this, he's got to condemn this expletive ASAP. The Capitol Police tweet is not enough. Then there are these texts you see from Fox News host Laura Ingraham. Mark, the president needs to tell the people in the Capitol to go home. This is hurting all of us, rather. He's destroying his legacy. There's Sean Hannity, who you see lit up there. Can he make a statement asking people to leave the Capitol? And Brian Kilmeade, please get him on TV, destroying everything you have accomplished. So far, no comment from Fox formally about this. But Garrett, you have to imagine that these texts, including the ones from unnamed lawmakers here, like, for example, one who says Pence, as president of the Senate, should call out all electoral votes that he believes are unconstitutional as no electoral votes at all. And another saying, yesterday was a terrible day. We tried everything we could in our objection to the 6 states. I'm sorry, nothing worked. And Garrett, you have to think that this is going to come up, right? As we start to see this discussion, as we start to see this floor debate, this is going to be central, I think, to the arguments that you're going to hear, especially from those who believe that Mark Meadows should, in fact, be held in contempt.
Yeah, Hallie, the Select Committee has been really careful about what information, what evidence they've gathered that they have allowed back out into the public. They have been largely a black box about the material and the witness statements that they've been receiving, but they released these text messages last night, and they've alluded to more that perhaps we might see later today, because they want to show what they think they know about Mark Meadows' involvement and to indicate what they think they could get if they ever are able to get him to talk more fully. Of those text messages, while the Fox ones and the Donald Trump Jr. ones are kind of the bold-faced names, I think perhaps more important to the investigation are those from other lawmakers talking about the plan to throw out electoral votes or the frustration after the fact that they were unsuccessfully able to do so. That's really core to the Select Committee's investigation. And now you've got Meadows and his attorney both pushing back today and overnight, arguing they're still trying to protect Donald Trump's claim of executive privilege. And Meadows' attorney coming out with a statement today that essentially makes an argument that the Select Committee might be biting off more than it can chew here, or might be creating a bad precedent, talking about the idea that the documents that Meadows has produced, he argues, prove that they shouldn't hold him in contempt, that he is trying to work with them, and that he's working in good faith, and that perhaps this effort to hold him in contempt might have a chilling effect on other witnesses. I can tell you members of the committee aren't buying that argument. They will move forward, but I expect there's a lot more to come out of these 9,000 pages of documents.
Yeah, no kidding.
That Meadows turned over than just these text messages.
I know that we still don't know, right, who these lawmakers are involved in these texts. Any hints on that so far, Garrett?
The committee chairman talked to our colleague Hallie Talbot a little bit about this earlier today. They are not releasing the names, although he did tell us we won't be surprised at who they are. It largely lines up with the House Republican lawmakers who have been so vocal back then, and frankly, some of them even till now, about their beliefs about who won the election or not.
And obviously, President Biden, Joe Biden did. Pete, let me go to you here because you heard Garrett talk about this argument now from Mark Meadows' attorney, the argument that they've been making really since Meadows came to the forefront in this discussion as it relates to the January 6th Select Committee. How do you sort of pull on that thread of this executive privilege claim in light of everything we're seeing, Pete?
Well, if the House does vote to find him in contempt, as does seem likely here, I think this is going to be a much tougher decision for the Justice Department than it was in the case of Steve Bannon. First of all, there is a longstanding Justice Department policy that says the president's closest advisors, and the chief of staff would certainly count, and current and former, are absolutely immune from any compulsion to testify before Congress. They don't have to show up. Secondly, he has cooperated with the committee. So those are two factors in his favor, unlike Bannon, who didn't cooperate at all. But on the other hand, you have now a ruling from the D.C. Court of Appeals here in the separate case involving Trump and the archives, in which the D.C. Circuit, this is the law of the circuit now, binding on the Justice Department and all the courts here, is that the president's executive privilege, whatever it is outweighed by Congress's need for information in this investigation. So there's not much left of Trump's executive privilege, at least when it comes to presidential documents. That same logic, it would seem, would apply to the testimony of his former aides. So that's why I say I think this will be a tough one for the Justice Department, unlike the Bannon decision, which seems pretty straightforward.
Nicholas, let me turn to you here because I know as we're talking about this contempt of Congress vote, again, just to set the stage here for folks watching and listening, about 23 minutes from now, we expect that debate to begin. We're going to dip in live as news warrants there. We also know that there's, as we look ahead to what else the committee's doing, they're trying to get more depositions from other people, right, in the Trump orbit. And as they were going in for a deposition, the attorney for one of the rally organizers on January 6th, the guy Dustin Stockman, said this, which we thought was interesting. Watch.
Vigilantes, insurrectionists, and masters of a lawless mob conspired against the District of Columbia, its law enforcement officers and residents by planning, promoting, and participating in the violent attack on the United States Capitol.
Well, that was the D.C. Attorney General, obviously, not the attorney for Dustin Stockman. We're going to talk about that in a second. Let me see if we can play the correct bite here.
There are people that are very senior in the former president's orbit, and there are also even lawmakers among them who I believe have good reason to be quivering in their boots today.
Nicholas, what do you make of that? Reason to believe they'll be quivering in their boots today. How do you read that?
Well, I was at that press conference earlier this morning, and as you might have seen in that video, Mr. Stockton was carrying this binder of documents into the committee, and in what his lawyer had described would be a treasure trove of messages, emails, texts between Stockton and these what appeared to be senior Trump world figures, lawmakers, and staffers. And he was asked about this, and it's not entirely clear at this point what the contents of these messages are, but we got a little bit of a clue yesterday when a Rolling Stone article where Stockton gave extensive interviews was released, and he talked about how a lot of these conversations with members and staff had to do with how to plan these rallies leading up to January 6th and contacts about the execution of that. And so we can expect to see more about that come out in the coming days. And as we speak right now, Stockton is telling things in his own words to the committee, right, as are other witnesses. And so the committee members have said that they want to put this into some kind of public report next year, and we'll start to see the fruits of that in the coming months.
Pete, let me go back to you on that soundbite that we had played from the D.C. Attorney General. He was doing that as he was announcing this new lawsuit now against the Proud Boys, against the Oath Keepers. Can you tell us more about that?
Right. Those groups and individuals, many of whom have already been charged criminally in the district court here, This is an attempt to hold those groups and those individuals financially responsible for the attacks on Washington and the Capitol. It goes beyond just the attacks on the Capitol, the attacks on D.C. police officers, the damage throughout the district, the cost of the city. So they ask for an unspecified amount of damages to help make the city whole for that, an unspecified amount of punitive damages. And it basically says that these two groups were key to driving the violence that led to the attack on the Capitol. Now, frankly, there's nothing new in these documents that isn't already in the documents that are against the now nearly 700 people who have been charged with crimes here in the district, including the two big conspiracy cases against the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers. Much of the evidence in the civil lawsuit or the allegations is based on what's already been in court documents, but it is another avenue, another way to hold them accountable.
Garrett, let me go back to you here before we check back in with you. I know later on in the hour, but what is the biggest thing that you are watching for in the next 2 hours? Besides, obviously, this vote, but when we see these floor speeches begin for this debate on the contempt charge for Mark Meadows, what are you going to be keeping an eye on most closely?
I'm curious to see if the committee members, when they speak, will be presenting any new evidence here. As I said earlier, they've been very careful about how they release little bits of what they know, be they text messages, be they things that they've come up in the interviews that they've conducted. And they do try to do so to take some degree of advantage of media coverage. Speaking as someone who's reporting on this quite closely, a floor debate would be a pretty good time if they want to try to take more advantage.
We will be watching that. You will be watching that. Thank you all so much for breaking that down for us, at least for now. More on that with our thanks to Pete and to Garrett and to Nicholas coming up later in the show. We want to